Baby, to most of us, Beyonce is that girl. She is her. Her Beehive, her Royal Reign, and her record breaking Renaissance tour have inspired millions of people across the world. In fact, we just want to take the time to celebrate her contributions as the highest grossing Black touring artist of all time and the barriers that she is breaking with her Renaissance movie. Yes, make sure to watch it out. Check it out, right? And today's guest was influenced by Beyonce's bravery in charting her own path. When Break My Soul said, "Release your job," she released it and sealed the deal. Now transitioning on a path to become a diversity, equity, and inclusion trailblazer, I had the honor of speaking with Deaunn Watson, a powerful advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion, racial equity storytelling, and social change, on the boldness it takes to quit your job and blaze a new path through life. I hope this episode will inspire you to find the confidence to go after the life that you truly deserve. And yes, this was the first episode I recorded. This is truly a blast for the past, but I waited for this moment. I think we need this Beyonce made me do it energy in the new year. So please enjoy this special new year related release because it's January and I know you're still trying to manifest that job that you want. And yes, happy listening. Welcome to Beyonce Made Me Do It with me and Deaunn Watson. Enjoy. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Purposeful Professional Podcast. Very excited to have the first guest. I'm going to let her introduce herself. Deanna, introduce yourself to the listeners.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, thank you for allowing me here in this space. My name is Deanna, and I am here to talk all things Beyonce and choosing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this episode title is pretty unique. So it is Beyonce Made Me Do It. You know, Beyonce's made us do a lot of things, but when Break My Soul was released, Beyonce made us release our job. Okay. Shout out to Beyonce and Big Frida for releasing that job energy because that job was holding us up, and especially in 2022. So it's Beyonce made us do it, quitting jobs, new beginnings, and finding dreams beyond labor. So we want to start with a reflection on the lady of the hour, Beyonce, of course. So I want you to talk about Renaissance, right? In our previous conversation, you said that Renaissance was the album that made you join the Beehive. Why was Renaissance a turning point for you?
Yes, and Beehive, don't get me. Am I? Do you hear playback from me?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
You're good. Yeah.
All right. So yes, Beehive, do not come and sting me. I know I probably should have been on the train since the Destiny's Child days, but the great thing is growing up, I always saw Destiny's Child around me, right? And so we were always given those empowering messages, but I kind of just took it in passing. I didn't really, go searching for Beyonce. And I think what did it for me was Homecoming. Lemonade, because I felt that it was a love letter specifically to us, right? Where we could be the center and we just get to celebrate and enjoy that. So what Renaissance did for me was it came at a time where I doubted myself the most. I was the most unhappy in my career, and I was at a transitional point, but I felt stagnant, right? And so here comes this album that's giving you all of this affirmation and is pushing you to just go and quit the job. You don't like it, right? And so with every track on the album of Renaissance, it was interesting in how it aligned with what I needed to hear in the different spaces I was in professionally, personally, spiritually, being a Black woman. It just covered so many facets. And so I think I allowed myself to just nest in that creativity that she gave that allowed me to really find myself.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Renaissance was just that come to Jesus moment that we all needed. The pandemic took a lot away from us, and it is by no mistake that Beyonce chose Break My Soul to be the leading single, because I remember where I was at in that moment when I heard Break My Soul. Literally,
dreams were shattered. I mean, like pandemic shattered dreams, goals, plans. I was unemployed, not because I couldn't find a job, but because I didn't want my job. So I left my job as well. And I think that's something that we share as well, having left jobs around the same time. And I think that was just a moment where we could celebrate ourselves. We could celebrate being us.
Yep.
And it was like that for us, by us moment that I
Yep.
think Beyonce gave to us. So really grateful for her for that. I want to know, like, so you talked about Homecoming, but you also talked about this being the turning point for you. So like what aspects of the album resonated the most? If you think like sonically, lyrically, musically, what
Yeah.
resonated with you? Like beyond release your job, because we did
Right,
that.
right. Did
Like
that.
what resonated with you the most?
Ooh, so in going to therapy, so this was also around the time Renaissance came out. I was really starting to get heavy into therapy where I was like going weekly. And to convince myself that I wasn't quote unquote crazy, whatever society has created that to mean, right? And I think for me, there's three tracks. Alien Superstar, I feel like is just for all of the Aquarius in the house because we really feel like we're not a part of this planet. And there were times where I felt like, God, I know you did not put me here to just labor and suffer. And that is my existence.
Ooh.
Like I know you have something better in store for me. And then so Alien Superstar really affirmed that for me, just feeling as though, I am in the world, but I'm not of it, right? I have a
Mm,
purpose that lends itself well beyond what I could even imagine earthly, right? So there was that. But I think Renaissance and Homecoming and projects like that really solidify Beyonce as a cultural curator. I love being able to curate experiences for my people, by my people. And
mm,
so when you understand like the influences and the homage that she pays to just black excellence and queer excellence, that was so defining for me because we don't really get to see ourselves as architects of our own experience. And Renaissance allowed me to just even visualize and imagine what is the life that I want and what elements have to be present. So that one, and then you have moments like Heated, where this world just gets you down and you just need to talk your shit one good time. And so Heated is like my go-to for that. And so I just feel like every track has something for each aspect of me. And that is what allows me to show up as a fully flawed character and not just this monolith of whatever we say Black women are.
yeah, absolutely. And I think moving on that point, Beyonce is committed to this unearthing of the black female experience.
Mhm.
I totally get this alien superstar, like you're too classy for this world, but you are that girl. Like
Right, right.
it's that complexity. It's like, okay, I'm classy, but I'm still that girl. One of
Mhm.
my favorites as well is Church Girl. And it kind of
Yeah.
represents this duality of who am I? How do I navigate this black womanhood, which is
Mhm.
complex, multifaceted, amazing? Now we're saying like black women are more than magic because we are more than magic. We're so
Yeah.
many different things. So I think Renaissance was so timely for the moment. And I do agree that Alien Superstar has to be my favorite too. Heated, I'm kind of mid on that, but I totally get if you like that one. I would have to say Alien Superstar, Church Girl, and then America Has a Problem. Because
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember thinking, America has a problem. Like that intro just lives. I don't want to say it lives rent free in my head, but it
Mhm.
does.
Yeah.
Because I always think that all the time. Like America has a problem, and
Mhm.
I really love how she was able to give us all of that, and then still give us bops like "Cuff It" and "Break My Soul." It
Mhm.
really was a great album and a great piece of art, and I think it
Yeah.
should inspire more Black female artists, especially to like lean into your complexity, like you said. Like, don't be the monolith. Lean into who you
Mhm.
are.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back to this point of releasing your job, right? So when did that happen for you? When did you release your job, and what was the moment for you that you knew it was time to leave your job? Like, where did you realize that this is no longer serving me?
See, I think even that's a lesson because I always knew.
Mm,
I just didn't
mm,
trust myself with the information that I knew, right? So there was this dichotomy of my soul had released the job when we talk about breakup. So like my soul released it. I was just showing up, right? But then when you have the alignment of your soul and your mind and all of those things come together, for me, that was August 5th. I made the decision. And I remember I wanted to do it, but I just kept punking out on it, like, no. And then as Black women, we feel like we have to save the day. Like, if I leave, then what's going to happen? Or, I feel I have this relationship with martyrdom where it's like, okay, I have to martyr myself for this greater cause, or I have to suffer and endure so that this happens. And I would go in with the idea like, okay, today is going to be the day I resign. And then I would talk myself out of it because I didn't yet have anyone's permission. I was waiting on someone else to give me permission on what to do with my life and what to do about this next big step. And so there was one day I woke up the night before, actually. I typed up the resignation. So then it was like I was holding myself to something if I wrote it out. And then that morning I went to work a couple hours early to print it out. So now I've written it and I printed it. You got to go through with it. I was trying to eliminate as many obstacles I could give myself to, like, talk myself out of it. And then, I just had the conversation with my boss, who's another Black woman. And I remember feeling so heavy and so guilty that I was choosing myself. Um,
Whew.
but I remember also that exhale you just did. As soon as I walked out, I felt like I could breathe
Mhm.
again. And I didn't realize how long I had been holding my breath in that job. But it was like the moment I decided to release was the moment I was able to reclaim myself. And for me, that started kind of my renaissance.
Yeah. So it was so during Renaissance, you had a Renaissance. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful and very complex and very great. So just to ask, like, were you working in education? What field were you working in?
Yes, I was working in education, which is a complex place to be, especially for me, being first generation college grad, being the first Black teacher that a lot of our kids had or have had. And so there's a loyalty that I felt even to that. Years prior, before I decided to resign, I knew that I wanted something beyond the classroom, but because my identity had been so intertwined in education, I felt that I was betraying my community if I stepped away from the classroom or stepped away from education. So I was like, okay, I'm going into leadership. So I'm not completely leaving education. I'm just leaving the classroom. But then once I got into leadership and being a Black woman in leadership, I was like, oh, is this really about the kids or is this politics? And so I felt myself getting further and further away from my humanity and being in that role.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a lot to unpack. Thank you for even sharing all of that. So when you said martyrdom, my mind immediately went to the educational system. And I'm like, okay, ask her if she worked in education, because I know that Black teachers, you feel an extra responsibility. Like, those students are not just your students. They could be your family members. You see your kids in them. You see, your future grandkids in them. Like, you really feel very connected. And I think it can be hard for Black teachers to leave the profession because you know that you're so needed,
Yeah.
especially in an environment where there are very few of you. So props to you for making that decision. And it sounds like it was hard for you because you had to print it out, like you had to go through the motions, but you had to learn, like, hey, to choose yourself. And I love how you talked about the fact that your soul released that job before you did. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the reality of leaving a job. Like, your mind does it before your body follows through with it. And I think you feel it spiritually that, like, this is not the place for me. I
Mm-hmm.
can be doing more. I can be more. I can give more to the world than what I'm doing here. And education is just one of many ways to make an impact. Like, there's so many different ways. So props to you for even knowing that, like, education is just not it.
It's
And
Yeah. And you know what? I think for you, when you mentioned Church Girl,
mhm,
actually, that was the song I played as I wrote the resignation and before I went into the school. And the reason why is because I had been waiting for someone to give me permission. Like, I would call home or I would call my friend, do you think I should stay? Or do you think I should just hold out 6 more months? And there's a line in Church Girl where Beyonce sings, no one can judge me but me. And it
mm,
was just a great moment for me because it's like, Deanna, it's your life. You get to decide where you go, how long you stay. You don't need anyone else's permission to do it. And the funny thing is, my great aunt from Georgia calls me and I tell her that, oh, I just resigned from my job. And her response was, oh, well, I know you didn't quit your job and not have another one lined up because my family knows
oops,
to just be safe.
mm,
Deanna's always going to take the safe route. She's always going to do what's responsible. And I said,
yeah.
no, I don't have a job lined up. And the pause of silence that happened thereafter, it made me question myself because I was like, oh, I must have really messed up because this isn't what Deanna does, you know?
No, I love how you're talking about that and processing that, and I also love how you realize nobody can judge you but you. Like there comes a time in our lives where we have to stop asking for permission,
Yeah.
and I think as Black women, that can be so liberating to just exist and stop asking for permission.
Hmm.
When I look at like the soft life movement that's taken off, it's because people are tired. Like we're
Right.
tired of functioning under the current system, and I
Hmm.
think it's time for us to just be allowed to be. And
Yeah.
it's great that you gave yourself that ability to just be, because I think you'll go your whole life being the martyr for
Hmm.
other people because you don't tap into the fact that okay, this might not be safe, but I'm not called to this anymore, you know?
Okay. Yeah, I agree.
Mhm. All right. So, I feel like I want to go deeper into, so you talked a little bit about like martyrdom, the history, but I want to know like, do you feel like Black women have been provided with the space to rest historically? And if there's anyone listening today who is a Black woman who's asking themselves, like, hey, I'm on this path, I don't know where it leads, but I just don't feel confident about it, what advice would you have for them?
Mm. You know, that's good because I claimed my freedom when I resigned, right? And the first month it was really great. I was like, "Ah, I don't have to wake up by an alarm. I really get to just take this time for me." I thought that I would have a job within 3 months, right? And for one reason or another, and I feel like it's God redirecting, um,
Mm,
I this has been a season of rejection and me understanding my relationship with rejection, that it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with my value, but I had gone so long internalizing offers and rejection as something to do with how valuable I was. So that was a struggle. And then because I was not working, mind you, since I was in high school, I went to an early college academy, everything was about labor. Rather, it was academic labor, mental labor, physical labor, but it was labor, labor, labor. And growing up as someone who didn't have access, right? There's also a labor in survival where
mm,
you're doing certain things because you're in survival mode. So if you imagine, I've been doing that since I was 15 years old. Then
yeah.
all of a sudden, when I wake up and I don't have a schedule, or I don't have to be in a building and I don't have to do the functions of my job description, there were times where I could not just sit and rest, right? Because I was so conditioned socially to be up and doing something, even if that's doing 20 applications a day. And so there was a time and a point where my therapist said, you know, how often do women, particularly Black women, get to take this amount of time off and your bills are covered, you're covered, and you don't want for anything? And when I thought about that, particularly when it comes to my lineage, seeing my mother, my grandmother, my grandmothers, they did not have, you know, the luxury of rest. And so for me, then that became revolutionary, where everything became about slowing down. Even, and if you're struggling with it, here's a suggestion. I give myself activities. Go to Target. Don't spend $400, but go to Target
Mhm.
and just understand how much we are in the hustle and bustle of life. Where I realized I was rushing to an aisle and I had nowhere to be. You know what I mean? But it was just my body has been so used to that. And so I
Mhm.
purposely made myself slow down. Like you're going to slowly walk. And that was very uncomfortable. But the more you do it and allow it to be your practice ground of slowing down and being present in the moment, you'll start to notice when things are making you rush, right? So now that I'm in job interviews, because I have been in this practice of being centered, being aligned, and being able to show up as my authentic self, I immediately detect when there is something that is resistant to that.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Ooh, that's good. No, that's really, really good. I love the fact that you talked about slowing down intentionally. Because even in Target, you were so used to rushing down an aisle to get things. I think I agree with you. Historically, we have not been provided with the opportunity to rest. And many of us suffer from, like you said, the martyrdom, but also the worker bee syndrome of like, hey, I want to work. I have to be useful. I have to be useful. And there's this thing that I've been learning about, especially as I took the leap to also leave my job and do what I'm doing now with identity. The abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset. And
Yes.
when you talked about your family looking at you like, hey, like you don't have a plan B, I thought about my family and how certain members of my family looked at me that way. You know, like, you don't have a plan B. What are you doing? But I had this vision of abundance. I was like, you know what? I know that I'm more than this job. And let me tap into abundance, even if I don't see the resources, even if I don't see the job. Let me believe that it's coming, or let me believe that the opportunity is coming. I always say when I left my job, I entered a birthing season where ideas just came to me, things came to
Yeah.
me out of thin air because I no longer was preoccupied with appearances. I no
Mhm.
longer was preoccupied with trying to fit in where I don't fit in.
Right.
So I love the fact that you talked about like shifting into authenticity, because I think that's what I want for all of us as listeners, like getting in touch with our authentic selves, shifting into authenticity, because I
Mhm.
think we deserve it. We deserve to have that rest. It's great as well that you're also picking up like, I cannot be my authentic self in this space. And
Yeah.
that shows me that you're connected with your authentic self, because a lot of the time you'll go into interviews and you'll automatically be on edge. You'll
Yeah.
automatically have that bad gut feeling of like, this is not it. I don't feel aligned here. Especially those employers that do like 4 rounds of interviews for one job.
For what? Yes.
Yeah. No, but they do it because it's like, oh well, we have to be careful
Mhm.
to screen people. You know, they do 4 rounds of interviews for one job. Those people get on my last nerve.
I
And
was the
now,
one where it was 8 rounds.
I mean, I can only imagine for like director level positions. I mean, let me tell you, like now when I think about those multiple round jobs, I'm literally like, my heart is like, I cannot do it anymore,
Yeah,
because it doesn't take you 5 to 6 interviews to know if you want me or not. Like
that
you either
part.
want me or you don't want me. But I love how you were able to connect with that part of yourself. And I think that's very, very inspiring. So moving on the topic of authenticity and like what
Mhm.
unemployment has taught you, for those listening, like what would you say are the gifts of unemployment? Because I know like unemployment, like everything else, brings both gifts and challenges, but how would you be able to like help someone to structure this time being unemployed to see the gifts within it? Like what would you say are the gifts in unemployment? What has this time brought to you?
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many gifts. There have been many a night where I've cried too. So I do this thing called audio journals because I've just never been that girl who's going to do the diary, right? Probably because someone read that my diary when I was younger. But
Mm,
audio journals because I'm very big on capturing moments in the human experience, and this is a big moment in my Black womanhood experience,
mm,
right? Where I'm taking rest, but I'm also in a space of uncertainty. There were a big time chunk of time in this space. I've been unemployed for 6 months, but there's been a big chunk of time in this space where I've questioned my discernment. Like maybe I shouldn't have
mm.
done that. Maybe I should have come up with a better exit strategy or exit plan. And so I read somewhere where they did a study on Black women and depression, and they said that
Okay.
particularly Black women, we feel depression on an entirely different level. And two of the stark differences is one, we blame ourselves and we punish ourselves. And it made sense because all of January and February, that was a dark place for me because I had so much of my value tied up into a role and I felt that I had
Mm,
completely stripped, right? And so if I wasn't in this high job, right, director of such and such, then I felt like, okay, what do I have to offer professionally? And then academic wise, I got into Boston College for their global studies program.
oh
Uh,
wow, that's
even though it wasn't aligned, right? But everything about me was academics, career, and being
mm,
stripped of both of those, it felt like I had nothing to offer. And that's a very interesting place to be where you feel that you have no value because you're not working, you're not in academics, AKA, you're not suffering, right? And so being able to get myself away from how much I'm willing to suffer for the world and trying to figure out what are the other parts of Deanna that I put on the shelf so that I could survive in this space. And so in that time, one of the gifts is starting to take those things off of the shelf. I told my friend, I said, I know I'm supposed to be a storyteller. I know that is what my purpose is, why my
Mm,
ancestors sent me, why God has let a lot of things come to pass so that I could be here in this time and space. But I wasn't sure of whose story I'm supposed to be telling, what kind of story am I telling, because I'm not tied to a story of suffering just for the sake of suffering. But then
yeah.
also, who do I tell that story to? And I felt like I was constantly hitting a wall. And then I thought, well, maybe you're hitting a wall because you're putting your intention into being something for someone else's company or organization, where this time is meant for you to really figure out and hone in and make clear of what is this practice ground going to be for you and for the
Mm.
community that you serve. So after February, which is also when I turned 30, I was just like, the next time I put my blood, sweat, and tears into something, it'll be something for me and my people.
Ooh. Yeah, no. Let me tell you, that is it. That is it. Like you had these things on the shelf. These
Mhm.
dreams, this storyteller purpose, all of these things that you had abandoned to fit into the working world to be useful. And that study that you referenced on Black women and depression, I actually read that study.
Yeah.
And one of the highlights of that study was that a lot of Black women are functional depressive, which means that we still operate, we still hold it down. And people can say that's a byproduct of slavery, right? I mean, the slaves and the ancestors were depressed, but they still had to pick it up and pick up the slack and cook meals and take care of the children and, tend to the flock and do all of those things. So we are built under pressure. And I think for some of us, like not having that pressure can be a very foreign environment to be in, like literally in our genes. We're used to pressure, we're used to stress. So not having it can be very isolating and sometimes also very challenging for us. But I love the fact that you were able to tap into those parts of yourself outside of labor, outside of what you can do for someone else. I think even beyond Black women, I think as women, it's hard for us to
Mhm.
look at ourselves independent of what we do for others.
That
And
that is a part. And you know what? I felt guilty because here I am unemployed and I was turning down jobs because I just kept saying, it's not enough. I'm worth more. It's not enough. It doesn't feel aligned. But then after you turn down the third job, and I'm just like, my sister said something interesting. She said, well, maybe, you're being picky, right? And I went to the kitchen and I kept cooking, but that just stuck with me. And so I came back into the living room and I said, why don't I get to be picky? Like I've always accepted what was put on the table in front of me. Thank you for the
mm,
crumbs. And I ate it like it was a 5-star meal. And in this season, I want to be picky. I want to be able to say, this is what I'm worth, or this is what I bring to the table. And that also doesn't have to have anything to do with money. It's also, I want a place to work where I get to show up as my full, authentic self, and where I'm not charged to save the burning building.
yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you, like some people online say burn the cape. Yes, like do not let Black women, do not allow yourselves to be put in certain situations. I totally feel that. But I think one thing that's unique about your situation is it's this thing of turning 30 that I've heard all about. So
Yeah.
I'm 22, so I'm far from that. But it's this thing of turning 30 where people say like now I finally feel free, or now I finally feel like I can do what I want to do and be who I want to be. And the purpose of this podcast is to talk about that path of like,
Yeah.
that I don't want to say we're imposters wearing a mask, but a lot of us in the 20s, we're just trying to make it. We see these people making six figures straight out the gate, having multiple master's degrees. Now there's a lot of millionaires, billionaires in the 20s range. So we feel that pressure. That's where this whole quarter life crisis comes from. We
Yeah.
feel this pressure to be successful by 25, billionaire by 35. There's a lot happening that I'm glad that you were able to give yourself that time before reaching that milestone birthday, because I think that's very special.
Yeah.
And I think that it sounds like, like Drake would say, God's plan. Like
It is. Yeah.
it sounds like God's plan. So moving back to this concept of authenticity, like were there any spaces that you felt like you could be authentic? I know you're pivoting from
Mhm.
working in education to wanting to work in DEI. Like, were there any spaces in education where you felt like you could be your authentic self in these spaces or in any other jobs that you have?
In education, I felt I could be my most authentic self with my students.
Mm.
I could, I was not always locked up. I worked at a conservative school before, and the way people were treated based on their hair made me realize, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do that. But when I'm with my students, I feel most authentic. My subject verbs do not always have to agree, even though I'm teaching language arts. I can show up as my full self in terms of where I come from. And it's interesting because the other day when I was questioning what am I supposed to do, because I'm not getting any offers, and I was like, well, you're a storyteller. That's what you're supposed to do. And I remembered even when I was teaching, maybe they remember the grammar, maybe they remember to cite their evidence at the end, right? But I think what they'll most remember and what they most wanted from me was a story. Whether that was a story of me beating a girl up down the street for messing with my sister, or that was a story of me figuring out how to navigate the homeless shelter. But that the story was the human connection. And so I feel like any space where I'm allowed to connect as a human and be able to be my fully flawed self, those are the spaces where I come alive. In spaces where it is, don't be too black, don't be too woman, don't be too. I feel like as Black women and as women too, but just as Black women specifically, this experience, I constantly receive a message of I'm too much.
It's a
And then,
misogynoir.
yeah, and you have to
Mhm.
bow back to make other people comfortable. In the classroom, that doesn't exist, and probably because we do the work of cultivating that experience. In leadership, once I transitioned out of the classroom and into leadership, that was an interesting place to be because you find out how much of the world does not like taking direction from Black people. And so that's a lot to deal with because you put in so much work for your accolades and your credentials, but those are the very things that are being questioned once you hit a leadership position.
Mhm. Yeah, no. I think that's definitely a great, very, very great insight, especially on Black women and in leadership. I think it's funny how I remember I read McKinsey's report on Black women at work, and I'm like, okay, how do I, as a 21-year-old at the time in
Mhm.
college, have the same experiences as all these other Black women?
Yeah,
It
we
can't
don't
be
make it up.
us.
Yeah,
Everyone says we're aggressive. Everybody says we're too much. Everybody says you better dial it down, tone it down. It's not us. If we're all having the same experiences,
yeah,
clearly there is something that is wrong. There is something in people not understanding us. And I love how you talked about that with your students. You feel understood, or you feel as if you could have been your authentic self. I think
exactly.
that's why teaching, while stressful, can be a very powerful profession for
Mhm.
Black people, because those students don't want the fake you. Those students want the real. Ooh, those students want the real you. They want the real you, right? What to connect with people, to connect with students, they want to really feel as if they know you as a person. So I
Yeah,
think that's something that's really, really great and really impactful. And I really love that you were able to share that. I also think that this misogynoir thing is hard to navigate, especially when it comes to leadership.
yeah.
I've been that Black woman in leadership that even at my young age, there's one woman, she looked on me and she was trying to help me, but she kind of made me feel worse. She was like, oh, well, you have 3 strikes against you, you're young, a woman, and Black. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do about who I am?
Yeah,
Am I supposed to change and change who I
yeah,
am? I can't do anything about that. So I find myself always, I don't want to say apologizing, because I've stopped that, but I found myself apologizing for the space I took up. I found
mhm,
myself apologizing for um who I was. And I think I wanted to release that in my
yeah.
process. And I encourage other people as well to release that, because we deserve to take up all the space that we can. I
All of
truly believe that.
it. Love it, love it.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think one of the things that I would love to ask you is, I want to talk about this quote of like, rest is resistance, right? And I
Mhm.
think a lot of us are, I mean, there's a lot of like Black women expats who are just traveling the world and who are completely out of this matrix, as they call it.
Mhm.
Like, what do you think about like the quote, rest is resistance? What does that quote mean to you?
It means intentionality, right? Like I'm not resting by accident here. um, and it's rest is resistance. It truly is resistance because we have to resist this idea that Black people at rest is laziness. I
Mm,
think that's what I had to do for me because I would wake up and if I wasn't doing something or if I wasn't spending my entire day searching for a job, I then felt like my job was, I then felt that my day was unproductive. And so this relationship we have with productivity, I can still be, rest is productive, right? And so I think for me, it comes down to a mindset shift. What is my relationship with rest? And I really had to do some deep uncovering of that, right?
mm,
Because imagine in schools, we've seen it where a kid happens to look out the window and dare to engage his or her imagination. Well, then what happens is the teacher chastises, pay attention, and now you have to leave that world. So we grow up being conditioned that rest is something that is not worthwhile or not of value. And then I started thinking about, well, did I see women in my family resting? Some hardworking women. And I had to go back and I was like, well, there were moments where my mom would say, I have to be at work, so I'm going to take a nap. And napping was a thing in our house. Or my grandmother would lay on the couch, and even though the TV show would be watching her at this point, but she was able to find some space in the day to just rest and not be of the world. And so I tried to incorporate that into my day to day. And now, if it hit 2 o'clock and I haven't had a nap, my body feels it. And so now that even pushes me into revisualizing what do I want in my next career and this chapter that I'm cultivating. I don't want to work 5 days a week. And I feel like that was such a struggle for me to say because one, people look at you like you've lost your mind. What do you mean you don't want to work, right? And I was like, no, I think 4 days is enough. I think that should be it. I don't want to work on Sundays. And so it kind of like catapulted me into then searching out like, are there women who have that? And then are there Black women who have that? And then I need to meet them so that I can see that it's possible.
no, there are definitely women who have that, and there are Black women who have that. I really love the fact that you're kind of bringing this concept back to mind for me, radical imagination. Like you
Mhm.
began to imagine what can a life with me not toiling and being tired all the time look like. And it's beyond even Black culture, it's a broader American culture where we are judged by what we do. And I think one of the things that I've had to go over and challenge myself in is getting rid of this mindset of I am what I do. There are people in my life that will love me irrespective of whether or not anything I do is a success. And when it comes time to like take these risks, when it comes time to sorry, let me just when it
Okay.
comes time to taking these risks and doing these crazy things like leaving your job, starting a business, starting a nonprofit, doing this content, you have to know who you are. And you really have to know that there are people out there that love me irrespective of if I feel. And I think in those moments, that's what I really try to tell myself. And that's how I'm able to conceptualize rest as resistance by thinking about the fact that there are people who love me for just being. They
Mhm.
love me as a human even if I do nothing more for them. I'm really transparent on this podcast. Y'all know from identity, I'm taking a mental health break. Like I put that in the Slack.
Amen.
I'm like, hey, like I'm taking a mental health break. There's something that happened in my personal life. And I think I was surprised to see the reactions of like, thank you for modeling healthy leadership. Cause I'm here
Yeah.
thinking, I'm gonna look like I'm a fool, you know. I'm gonna look like I can't be taken seriously because I said I need a break because I never saw leaders taking a break. I never saw that.
Yeah.
And I think we have been conditioned with this, you know, Gen Z millennials of like work, 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 because that's what our parents did. That's what our
Mhm.
parents did. They worked, 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 saved up, had a pension, retired well. That's what we were given. And I think what's great about this generation is the radical possibility we live in where we challenge these
Yeah.
things. And we're challenging these ideals to try to figure out like what is really mine, what is
Mhm.
for me, what is out there for me. So I love how you gave yourself the opportunity to live in that possibility.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I love that you brought that up too, because shout out to you for taking a mental health break, first of all. Okay. Never feel guilty. But I've even started noticing the more I started doing that, the more I affirm it in others too, right? So
Mhm.
because I'm giving myself that soft space and that gentleness, and that grace, I find that I'm doing it with others, like my friends in my friend group. I called my one friend, and it was a Monday, and I was like, "Oh, you still sound like you're in bed. Are you not working today?" "No, I took the day off." And I immediately was like, "I love that for you. Enjoy your day off. That job will be there tomorrow." Just things that I felt I needed to hear to feel okay about resting, because there is that tinge of guilt that we feel because we didn't go to work today.
This thing of guilt. And it goes back to this worker bee, like, and a lot of the time, let's keep it real, like the educational system, we're rewarded for what? GPAs, honor rolls, leadership and service,
Perfect
aka
attendance.
free labor to the school.
Yes.
Like, I remember I was so involved in leadership in college, and someone was like, you're just giving free labor. And I'm like, man, you're right. I'm just giving
Yeah.
free labor to this institution. And I think there's a time to volunteer, totally agree with that. But there's also a time to look out for yourself, and there's a time to champion yourself and your own dreams. And I think that
Mhm.
it's a wonderful time to live in this time. One of my favorite books is The Gifts of Imperfection by Brene Brown. And
Okay.
one of the things I had to embrace in my unemployment period, prior to founding Identity, is embrace this period of imperfection. Like, understand,
Mhm.
to some people, the fact that I don't have a job, I'm disowned, I'm out of the family tree. Like that, to some people, I'm cast away, right? But to other people, they love me for being imperfect. And I would love to ask you, like, how has unemployment changed your relationship with imperfection? Did it introduce you to this like perfectly imperfect concept? Because it did for me. It gave me that, like, I'm perfectly imperfect. I might not have everything figured out, but I'm loved irrespective of that?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's very touching, because that is what this journey has been. It has reshaped relationships. It has elevated other relationships. But of all the relationships, the relationship I have with myself, right? Um, where truly believing, if I never get another degree, if I never become a leader at another organization that's not my own, will I be okay with that? If this is the success, the height of success that I have, is that enough? And there was a time where it wasn't. I was constantly chasing the next thing, the next thing. And I think what you refer to as like this imperfection, embracing that,
Hmm.
is what I call like being able to be fully flawed and accepting
Hmm.
all of me, and not just the parts that look good on a resume or that look good on paper. And that took a lot of radical honesty with myself, because I got to the point where I was
Hmm.
like, listen, be to thine own self be true. You
Mm.
you have to wake up and look at yourself, right? And so I'm willing to go to those dark places, those ugly places, those beautiful places. I'm willing to go there with myself. And that's why I do audio journals, because I know if God lets me see it, if I'm 35 and 40 and I look back on this time, I'm going to see so much evolution, right? Because this time has been my practice ground. But I think in terms of relationships, there was a point where I was kind of like waiting in the cut, waiting for the gut punch of judgment from family and friends. And I never got it. And that was a conversation, because it was like, well, why was I waiting for that? Is it that I was punishing myself? And so I was projecting it onto other people, waiting for them to do the same thing? And for me, before my mom passed away, she always said, y'all are brothers and sisters. At the end of the day, all you have is each other. And in this space where I felt most vulnerable, because I felt most stripped, like I wasn't in school, I wasn't working, I just felt like I have no value. What am I going to do? And that is when my siblings, I feel, showed up the most. And from that, I was able to, it confirmed for me and affirmed for me that I don't have to do anything else beyond this point. No one has ever told me in my family, you have to be the creme de la creme and you have to be the top of your game all the time. It's like I could just go home and be Deanna, and maybe come with a 2 liter of fountain drink for the party. Have to bring all this other into it, right? Like I'm gonna be loved whether I have that or not. And for me, I think that's what allowed me to pull myself out of bed, go wash your face and brush your teeth. You're gonna be okay. But there was a time where I felt like, I don't know, if I'm not perfect, will I be okay? And being an educator, we're also like perfectionists. So it's about releasing control. I wanted to know, like, what is the last page of this chapter, God? Because it's looking a little dark over here. and just told myself, like, Deanna, you're so focused on the destination that you're missing the journey. So now I'm just trying to live in the journey of it.
Yeah, I mean the journey. That's a whole word. And about the darkness, I think we all have those times where it's like, God, it's dark. But I want to let you know, like, it's darkest right before the dawn. And my mom would always tell me that. And I stand on that word that, like, it's dark right before the dawn. It always gets dark right before there's a new thing that happens. So I think that it's wonderful that you were able to realize, like, you were beating yourself up. And I think oftentimes, like, we give ourselves so much, like, we give ourselves so much burden, and we put so much pressure on ourselves. Then we'll look at other people and be like, you. And it's like, no, it's me. I'm fighting me. It's me versus me. I don't know where I saw that, but I think I saw it on social media. No, it's me versus me. Like, I'm fighting myself. And I think that's the thing about, like, embracing this imperfection, releasing your job, embracing, you know, the multifacetedness that Beyonce even has embraced in herself. It's understanding it's you versus you. Get out the way of you. Everybody else is waiting on you to be that storyteller, to be that entrepreneur, to be that person that, to live out those gifts that God placed in you. Like, I remember when I was mad, let me not say I was mad, but I was mad at myself because I'm like, oh, I let my parents down. I didn't graduate from this good school and everything, and I don't have everything together. And I remember thinking, what do my parents want for me? To live my purpose. What does my heavenly Father, God, wants for me? To be obedient to his will for my life. So that created this whole thing where it's like, as long as I feel like I'm in my purpose and I'm happy and I'm healthy, I'm going to be loved by everybody. No, not by everybody, but by the people that matter. I think Dr. Seuss said, those who mind don't matter, and those who matter don't mind. Like, be yourself. And he was like the champion of, like, doing weird stuff. He was writing children's books. I mean, during a time where, like, everybody else was like, hey, go to war, be this type of man. He was an artist. He was a storyteller, and he was true to that. And that's why we have all these great, you know, all these great stories and illustrations because of his vision. So I always believe that, like, there are difficult moments in life, but if we tap into the fact that we are enough, you open yourself up to so much creativity, reinvention, renewal, renaissance, all the things we've been talking about today. So I want to end the podcast by asking you, what do you want for your future? Like, what is Deanna's career 2.0? How do you want to relaunch this phase of your career?
Oh, yes. So, I do not want this time to be in vain, right? What I thought was going to be a quick little 3-month vacation has turned into 6 months, but it has been so full, right? I've been able to come here and reclaim myself. And so I want to be able to tell stories that honor the human experience at the practice ground. And which is the name of my new business that I'm launching, the practice ground. My therapist, when I was having what I call my spiritual temper tantrum, like, this does not feel good. This is not what I signed up for. Okay. This is not what I imagined resigning would be. And one of the things that she always says is, like, this is your practice ground. I'm like, what does that mean? You know, when you're in the moment, you're just like, what? No. But it is truly practice ground, because I feel like the practice ground is where we go to release. It's also where we go to pick something up, where we learn about ourselves, we learn about others. And there's a freedom to be able to show up as your fully flawed self and not have that exploited. It's where I get to show up and be the center, especially in a world where I'm often relegated to the margins. The practice ground is a space where I get to come and be soft and cry, because oftentimes I feel like I have to have on my full armor to be able to navigate this space. So I want to be able to create the practice ground, and I want the practice ground to cultivate a space where people who are often in the margins get to be the center. They get to tell their story without being under the white gaze, and we get to reclaim our experience and ourselves. So that's ultimately what Deanna 2.0 chapter 30 is about. It's still that element of education, but it's educating through the power of story.
And I feel like through this whole conversation today that I've had with you, I can honestly say that is your purpose. And I would say that that is the purpose of the unemployment. That's what it served for you in your life. Like it opened you up to this radical possibility, to this radical imagination, to figure out, hey, like there's this concept of the practice ground. I want to bring it to other people. When you said take off the armor, I'm like, okay, you need a YouTube channel right away. Because there's so many conversations just in that space about like take off the armor, because so many of us, a lot of us, we have it on. Yeah. And we might not notice that we have it on, but we have it on. And I think there's so much like impact in that. That is a ministry right there that you're building, this practice ground of like we don't know how to be vulnerable, but we can practice that. We don't know how to be real, but we can practice that, because like you said, you're taking those that are on the margins and putting them in the center. That's powerful, because where are the spaces where we're centered? Very few and far between. So wish you the best with that. And I think that's something that's very, very impactful. So I want to do this little game with you. I know you've been looking for a job. So I have this challenge for you. I want you to say something to your future employer, like, dear future employer, this is what I want from you. Based on who I am, who I know myself to be, based on the time I've spent unemployed. Dear future employer, what would you say in that letter?
Dear future employer, I am looking for a chapter in which I get to show up as my full authentic self, locks and jewels in all, be able to show up as my full Black self. I want a job in which I am able to impact change that is ethical, but that also brings people from the margins and into the center. And finally, I want to be able to tell stories of the human experience, not ones just of suffering, but also of that radical joy. And so we have a space that cultivates all of those elements. That is a space that I want to be able to collaborate in.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that the power of like dear future employer, or even like dear future business, like what do you want your business to become? Like the power of that visualization is so powerful. So I think that's something I want to carry through. So before I end every episode, I want to always have a reflection for the speaker. So my first thing is like, how has this conversation resonated with you? Like, what are you taking from this conversation today?
Affirmation for me, it's so important to feel seen and to feel heard. And there was a time where I was probably embarrassed to tell this story. So being able to have a safe environment to share and to share in a way where I get to show up human, and that's beautiful, and that's great too. I'm definitely taking that, but I am also taking from it the way art informs life. It reflects life, but and Renaissance definitely reflects life, but it also pushes us to stake claim of ourselves. And I think what this art project of Renaissance is doing is it's enduring. I know that when I'm 35, 45, 55, I'm going to come back to this album and it's going to mean something new for wherever I am in that moment in life. So definitely from this conversation, just thinking about the artists we have who are here for the people, on behalf of the people, and the messages they're leaving behind, because that's what I want to do with Practice Ground. And you mentioned a YouTube channel. I do have a YouTube channel called Culturally Responsive Reviews, so y'all check that out.
Okay, it's a review channel. Very entertaining. I love reviews.
All right. Yep. And I just want to say thank you for providing this space. Another thing that I say is like, if I had been offered a job in maybe 15 of the jobs I've applied for, would I have done identity? And so that's something where I'm just like, everything happens for a reason and everything is coming to order in the way that it was designed. So, because I'm in identity, I get to know you, I get to talk to wonderful people on this podcast. And so I'm just really in this space of allowing the universe and my ancestors and my community to really rally around me, because it's unfolding.
Yes, for the ancestors. And it's the same for me too. Had I not left my job and not been able to find another job, had I not applied for that grant, all of this wouldn't be happening. So what I've been introduced to, and I think as an entrepreneur, you're going to be introduced to this too, this concept of like serendipity, like things happen because they're supposed to. And we could, as you say, practice ground, we could take that armor off because because it's going to happen when it's supposed to. And I think I want to end with this talking about the cultural significance of Renaissance. When I look back on Renaissance, it's just the fact that your Renaissance can happen at any moment in time. People wouldn't expect Beyonce's Renaissance to happen after twins, after being married for years, after being in the game for over 20 years. What do you mean reinvent yourself? Usually after 20 years in the music industry, you're put in a box. It's like you're this person, but she broke that box with the dance album. She broke that box by proving that mothers and married women can still have a career. She broke that box by never lowering her standard to fit what was popular, but elevating the culture. So I think a lot about that. And I want us to end on that too, like the cultural significance of Renaissance and what we'll be taking with us as we leave this conversation.
Yeah, that's dope.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I bought the whole vinyl. I don't think I'll regret a lot in this life, but if I do not get tickets to that concert, that will be a regret for me.
And even I feel like it's bad that fans are actually trying to go to the UK because the US tickets are too expensive, which is nuts to me. But yeah, Beyonce, girl, if you're listening to this, thank you.
Shout out to you.
Yeah, we're out. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Woo! This episode had so many impactful moments. Deanna was preaching a word. Y'all hear me? She was preaching a word. And I loved the relatability, authenticity, and vulnerability in this conversation. And I hope you did as well. Quitting your job is never easy. It takes courage. It takes guts. And I know some people listening right now, you might love your job. You might hate your job. But quitting sometimes is necessary. And even if you don't understand it, it can be such a great decision that can lead to new opportunities and new horizons. I'm really, really excited that the Purpose Lifers and the listeners got to share in today's wisdom about starting anew and starting fresh. To our Purpose Lifers and listeners, what takeaway did you get from today's podcast? I have so many, but the biggest one is that the life of your dreams is out there and possible for you. Do not settle. I think 2024, our theme word, fearless, right? But it should also be that we shouldn't settle. Whatever you want in life, know that it is possible for you. Keep the motivation going as we transition through 2024 and beyond. Take care, and until next time, this is Soraya with The Purpose Professional.